To understand why October 30th, 1942 mattered so profoundly, you need to understand what happened on February 1st, 1942. On that day, the German Kriegsmarine implemented a new system for encrypting U-boat communications. They added a fourth rotor to their Enigma machines, the machines that looked like typewriters but functioned as the most sophisticated cipher systems in the world. This new configuration, known to the British as Shark, was different from anything the code breakers at Bletchley Park had encountered before. Now, the story of the Enigma machine is famous. It's the story of Alan Turing, of mathematical genius, of mechanical computing machines called bombers that could run through millions of possible rotor settings. It's the story of how the British broke the German cipher and read their communications as clearly as if they'd been standing in the German High Command's office. But on February 1st, 1942, all of that brilliance, all of that hard-won understanding became useless. The fourth rotor changed everything. The Shark cipher was different in fundamental ways. The bommies that had worked before couldn't work now. The mathematical techniques that had succeeded weren't sufficient for this new problem. The British codebreakers, who had been reading German communications with confidence, suddenly couldn't read anything at all. At Bletchley Park, in Hut 8, the compartment dedicated to naval cryptanalysis, the atmosphere shifted from confidence to desperation. These men and women understood what was happening. They understood that their inability to read the U-boat codes meant that British convoys were sailing blind. Ships were being sunk by submarines that appeared to have supernatural knowledge of where the convoys were. But it wasn't supernatural knowledge. It was simply that the U-boats were no longer being tracked by British direction finding. It was simply that British naval commanders could no longer anticipate German movements. It was simply that 10 months of intelligence darkness had settled over the Atlantic like fog. The statistics from that 10-month period tell the story with brutal clarity. In the first half of 1942, while the Shark cipher went unbroken, 1.2 million tons of shipping was sunk in the Atlantic. In June 1942 alone, a single month, German U-boats sank over 600,000 tons. In July, the figure climbed higher. In August, higher still. The slaughter was accelerating. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the commander of the German U-boat fleet, was conducting a campaign of systematic starvation. He had a simple goal: sink more tonnage than the Allies could replace. If he could accomplish this, the mathematics were inexorable. Britain would run out of food. Britain would run out of supplies. Britain would be forced to surrender. And in the first half of 1942, Dönitz was winning. He was winning because the Shark cipher held. The hunt begins, afternoon of October 30th, 1942. Now, return with me to October 30th, 1942. It's still early morning. The sun hasn't yet lifted above the horizon. The Mediterranean is that particular shade of darkness that exists only in the moments before dawn. Purple, cold, indifferent, a Royal Air Force Sunderland flying boat, 4-engine aircraft, designed for reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare, is on patrol. The pilots have been flying for hours. Their eyes are tired. But they're trained to see what others miss. They're trained to spot the small details that matter. At 050 hours, the lookout sees it. A periscope. Just for a moment, a thin shaft of metal breaking the surface of the water, and then it disappears. But that moment is enough. The radio crackles to life. U-boat contact, coordinates transmitted approximately 70 miles north of Port Said. In Port Said, Egypt, 5 British destroyers receive the message simultaneously. HMS Hero, HMS Petard. HMS Pakenham, HMS Dulverton, HMS Herworth. The commanders on the bridges of these ships understand what's being asked of them. They turn their vessels toward the coordinates. The machinery of naval warfare begins to move. But aboard the U-559, beneath the surface of the Mediterranean, Kapitän-Leutnant Hans Heitmann doesn't yet realize he's being hunted. The morning is routine. The boat is at periscope depth, scanning the horizon for potential targets. There's nothing unusual in the radio reports, nothing that suggests that 5 enemy destroyers are converging on his position. By 12:34 in the afternoon, 12 hours after the initial sighting, another RAF Wellesley patrol aircraft spots the periscope again. The U-559 has maintained its course and position, unaware that it's being tracked. The aircraft banks toward the submarine, bombs away, depth charges, multiple explosions. The bombs don't need to be direct hits. The shock waves from underwater explosions are enough. They travel through water with perfect efficiency, seeking out the weakness in the submarine's hull. Inside the U-559, the crew experiences chaos. The boat rocks violently, instruments swing on their mounts, men are thrown against bulkheads, the lights flicker. In the engine room, sailors hear the terrible percussion of depth charge explosions muffled by water, but absolutely unmistakable. Each explosion is a reminder that men above want to kill them, and they're trapped in a metal tube at the bottom of the sea. The attacks continue. Over 16 hours, the 5 destroyers converge on the U-559's position. They launch more than 100 depth charges, more than 100 explosions in the water. The submarine's pressure hull, that magnificent piece of engineering designed to withstand crushing ocean depths, begins to fail. The hull develops cracks. Not at the main seams, but in places thought to be safe. Water doesn't care about engineering calculations. It finds weaknesses. It exploits them. The decision, nightfall, and the choice. Before Captain Heitmann. As darkness falls on October 30th, Heitmann faces a commander's worst decision. The U-559 can no longer run. The boat is too damaged. The batteries are nearly depleted. The compressed air used to blow water from the ballast tanks. The mechanism that allows a submarine to surface is nearly exhausted. Heitmann looks at his crew. He sees fear in their eyes. He sees the question they're asking without words. How much longer? He makes his choice. They will surface. The vents open. Compressed air forces water from the ballast tanks. The submarine's nose tilts upward. The crew feels the shift in gravity. They're ascending. They're rising through the water column. The pressure decreases as they climb. They're heading toward the surface, toward either salvation or the grave. The U-559 breaks through the surface at approximately 20-30 hours. The conning tower emerges. The night air hits exposed surfaces. But there's no moment of relief, no sense of safety, because HMS Petard is close, dangerously close, 60 feet from the U-559's hull. And at that moment, the Oerlikon 20mm anti-aircraft cannon opens fire. These aren't the massive shells of naval guns. They're rapid-fire rounds, smaller projectiles, but delivered with mechanical precision and devastating volume. The rounds punch through the U-boat's hull like a dentist's drill through teeth. The superstructure is torn apart. The pressure hull is compromised. Heitmann realizes instantly the U-559 is finished. The captain orders the crew to abandon ship. Not with military precision, not with any attempt at orderly evacuation. The order comes as a desperate shout, and the crew responds with desperate action. Men spill from the conning tower onto the deck. They jump into the cold Mediterranean without preparing the boat for sinking. They don't open all the seawater vents. They don't execute proper scuttling procedures. They flee, and in their panic, in their will to survive, they commit an error that will reshape the course of World War II. They don't destroy the codebooks. They don't secure the classified material. They don't ensure that the U-559 sinks so completely that nothing remains. This is not enemy cunning. This is not code-breaking brilliance. This is pure human error in the face of death. The volunteers. 3 men enter the darkness. From the bridge of HMS Petard, the destroyer's commander makes an extraordinary decision. The conventional response would be to ensure the U-boat is destroyed, to finish it, to make certain nothing salvageable remains. But this commander sees an opportunity. He orders a boarding party assembled. Immediately, 3 men step forward. Each one chooses to volunteer for what sounds like suicide. The U-boat is sinking. Its superstructure is torn apart. The water is cold and hostile, but they're going to board it anyway. First, Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, 24 years old, British naval officer, trained in combat but entirely unprepared for what he's about to do. He has rank and authority, but authority means nothing in these waters. He removes his uniform jacket with deliberate precision. The other sailors watch him. He's preparing himself mentally for what sounds impossible. Second, able seaman Colin Grazier, 20 years old, already proven his worth in the Royal Navy. His features are ordinary. Nothing distinguishes him from 100 other British sailors, but his mind is sharp, and his courage is about to be tested in ways he cannot imagine. Third, Tommy Brown. And here's where the narrative becomes almost unbelievable. Tommy Brown has a secret. He lied about his age when he joined the Royal Navy. He claimed to be older than he actually is. And in October 1942, Tommy Brown is 16 years old, not yet old enough to vote, not yet old enough to drive an automobile, but old enough to dive into dark water toward a sinking submarine. The 3 men don't discuss the risk. There's no moment where they weigh the probability of survival and decide it's acceptable. There's no heroic speech. They simply prepare themselves. Fasson and Grazier strip down to minimal clothing. Brown follows. They enter the water. The Mediterranean at night is a different creature than it is during daylight. The cold is absolute, a shock to the nervous system. Your body enters the first stages of hypothermia almost immediately. The darkness is nearly total. You can't see the sinking submarine clearly until you're right on top of it. They swim toward it, three figures in dark water, moving through a landscape lit only by minimal illumination from the petard. Fasson reaches the conning tower first. His fingers close around cold metal. Water splashes over him. He pulls himself up. The motion is trained, deliberate, but it feels like climbing a mountain when your muscles are already shocked by cold. He reaches the hatch. He pulls it open. He enters the U-559, descent into darkness. Inside the sinking submarine. Imagine this moment. The interior of the submarine is being invaded by seawater. Water is streaming through the gaps around hatches. Water is pouring in through damaged compartments. The U-559 is tilting at an angle that makes movement difficult. The darkness is almost total. Emergency lighting, powered by batteries that have been drained by hours of combat, provides only the faintest illumination, barely enough to see shapes, not enough to see details. The smell hits them immediately: diesel fuel, sweat, fear, something else, something like the smell of a machine dying. Fasson doesn't hesitate. He moves toward what he knows is the captain's quarters. Allied naval intelligence has memorized the interior layout of German submarines. He knows where things are. He knows the layout of compartments like a maze that's been studied 1,000 times. He navigates through the tilted corridors. Grazier follows. Brown follows him. They reach the captain's quarters. Fasson finds what he's looking for: a locked drawer. The lock is no obstacle. He forces it open with the kind of desperate strength that only emerges when you're underwater in a sinking submarine, and time is your enemy. Inside, documents, papers, code books. The most valuable intelligence material that could possibly exist in this moment of history. He passes them to Tommy Brown, who's positioned in the corridor behind him. Brown takes the papers. They're already beginning to absorb seawater, but they're intact. He climbs back up through the conning tower. Every surface he touches is cold and wet. His hands are shock-numbed from the sea. His fingers struggle to maintain grip on anything, but he climbs. He reaches the surface. He hands the papers to sailors in a small whaler, a rowing boat positioned alongside the U-559. They're received by hands that suddenly understand. Something important just came out of that sinking submarine. Something crucial. But Brown doesn't stop. He looks back at the submarine. The signal from below is clear. There's more. The race against time. Second and third descents. Brown dives back into the water. The temperature is already lower, or perhaps his body is simply losing its ability to generate warmth. The first stages of hypothermia have begun. Confusion, reduced motor control. But he pushes through it, down through the conning tower again, back into darkness. Fasson and Grazier have found more documents. The Kurzsignaler, short signal book. This is the encryption system itself. This is incomprehensibly valuable. But there's more. An actual Enigma machine, the mechanical device itself. encased in waterproof material, still functional if it can be recovered and dried. Brown takes the new batch of papers. He climbs out, delivers them. The whaler crew is working frantically now, understanding that they're in a race against time and rising water levels. A third trip. Brown dives again. It's becoming difficult now. His body temperature is dropping rapidly. He's experienced shock and near drowning and repeated exposure to cold water. His movements are slower. But he pushes deeper into the U-boat. Fasson and Grazier have located something else, a locked box. It's heavy. It's resisting opening. This must be crucial. Fasson works at it. Fingers numb, underwater in multiple senses of the word. Grazier is trying to help. The water level is rising. Compartments that were partially dry are now completely submerged. Time is compressing. The box finally opens. Inside, equipment. Equipment that must be crucial to the Enigma system. Fasson ties it to a line. The plan is to haul it out through the conning tower, but time has run out. The U-559 is sinking, not slowly, not methodically, but in the sudden, catastrophic way of damaged submarines. The water pressure is overwhelming what remains of the boat's structural integrity. The bow tilts downward at a steeper angle. The abyss, final moments, and the death of heroes. From the surface, sailors are shouting down through the conning tower. Not in words that Brown can clearly hear, just the urgency of their voices. Come up now! Brown climbs upward, struggling with each meter. His wet clothes are clinging to him, adding weight. The metal of the conning tower is slippery. Every handhold is a negotiation between his numb fingers and cold steel. But he climbs. He's driven by survival instinct and something else, the knowledge that his friends are still inside the submarine. But Fasson and Grazier don't emerge. Brown calls down to them. You'd better come up. Nothing. He calls again. You'd better come up. Silence. And then the submarine lurches downward. The angle suddenly changes. The bow points down at an angle that becomes increasingly steep. The stern rises. The U-559 is not sinking gradually anymore. It's collapsing into itself. The water pressure is too great. The structural failure is cascading through the hull. The conning tower tilts. Brown must move now or die. He abandons the attempt to retrieve his friends. He's a 16-year-old boy, and he has to save himself. He leaps from the submarine. His feet find the handrails of the whaler. Hands reach out from the boat and pull him in. From the whaler, from the petard, sailors watch in horror as the U-559's stern rises at a steeper and steeper angle. The angle becomes impossible. The submarine tilts at 45 degrees, then 60 degrees. For just a moment, the entire length of the submarine is visible, this vast metal tube that was supposed to be revolutionary, unsinkable, invulnerable, and then it's gone. The U-559 descends into the Mediterranean, 300 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet, down into the crushing darkness where pressure would implode a human body in seconds. Somewhere in its corridors, 40 feet below the surface when the final plunge occurs, are Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier. They did not emerge from the darkness. Bletchley Park, the papers that break an empire. 3 weeks later. November 24th, 1942. The documents arrive at Bletchley Park, a sprawling Victorian estate in the English countryside where British cryptanalysts work in absolute secrecy. The building is unremarkable from the outside. But inside, something extraordinary is happening. In Hut 8, the specialists are examining the papers with hands that shake slightly. They understand what they're looking at. They understand the implications. For 10 months, they've been blind. For 10 months, they haven't been able to read the shark cipher. For 10 months, convoys have been sailing into slaughter. And now, in their hands, is the key. Roger Wynne, the head of the submarine tracking room at Bletchley Park, holds the papers with reverence. He's been living with the strategic nightmare for 10 months. He's been watching the sinking rates climb higher. He's been reading the reports of ships going down. He understands at a visceral level what these papers mean. These are worth lives, he says to his colleagues. Many lives. Here's why these papers are so valuable. When the Germans implemented the shark cipher, they made an assumption. They assumed that weather reporting was too routine, too casual to be important. Weather reporting was just administrative noise. So they decided that weather officers at coastal German stations could use a simplified Enigma, a 3-rotor machine, when reporting weather to other stations. The U-boats receiving these weather reports needed to be able to read them. So they set their 4th rotor to a neutral position when decrypting weather messages. Temporarily, their 4-rotor Enigma machines became 3-rotor devices. This is a vulnerability, a small crack in an otherwise impenetrable wall, but it's a crack that can be exploited. The codebreakers understand immediately. If they can break the 3-rotor Enigma that was used for weather reports, if they can decipher a few weather messages, they can establish probable rotor positions. They can use the short weather cipher to understand the basic structure of the shark machine. Session 9, The Break, December 13th, 1942, Victory Through Understanding. By December 13th, 1942, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park have worked through the implications. They've analyzed the captured codebooks. They've tested the short weather cipher against known German weather reports. They've fed the information into the bombs, those massive mechanical computing machines that run through possible rotor settings at speeds that human mathematicians could never achieve. The message comes through from Hut 8. The code breakers have been working around the clock for weeks. They're exhausted, but they're speaking with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. We have it. On December 13th, 1942, the naval Enigma cipher is broken. After 10 months of complete blindness, the British can once again read the encrypted communications of German U-boats. They can read the messages sent between the Kriegsmarine High Command and the U-boat fleet in the Atlantic. They can read tactical orders. They can read position reports. They can read everything. The impact is almost immediate. Convoys begin to be rerouted away from U-boat positions. The wolf packs, which had been operating with near impunity, suddenly find their quarry disappearing. The hunters become the hunted. U-boats that expected to sink an average of 6 Allied ships per patrol suddenly find themselves sinking none. Some patrols result in no victories at all. By the end of December, U-boat sinkings have increased dramatically. The tide of the Battle of the Atlantic has turned. From this single moment in time, from papers retrieved by 3 British sailors from a sinking submarine, the entire strategic balance of the Atlantic War shifts. Admiral Dönitz notices the change. He requests assurances from German High Command that the Enigma is secure. He's told repeatedly that it is. They propose alternative explanations. Better Allied radar technology, improved direction finding, enhanced aerial reconnaissance. Anything but the truth. The Germans never discover that their codebooks are in British hands. The security around this intelligence, codenamed Ultra, is so complete that even after the war, many German commanders will go to their graves not knowing how their communications were compromised. The Turning Tide, 1943, and the collapse of the German submarine fleet. From December 1942 onward, the Battle of the Atlantic becomes a different war. The U-boats continue to fight. Some are still fearsome in their effectiveness. But the Allies, now reading the Shark cipher with increasing consistency, can systematically avoid the wolf packs. By May 1943, just 7 months after that afternoon in the Mediterranean, Admiral Dönitz will withdraw the U-boat fleet from the Atlantic. The campaign of strategic starvation is over. The slaughter has ended. The U-boats that were sinking over 1 million tons of shipping per month in early 1942 are now being hunted to extinction. The German High Command will never understand why. They'll blame radar technology that barely exists. They'll blame direction finding that's only partially effective. They'll blame aircraft and better tactics and luck. They'll blame everything except the truth. The truth is that 3 sailors dove into dark water and retrieved papers from a sinking submarine. In the first half of 1942, while the Shark cipher held, the U-boats had sunk 1.2 million tons of Allied shipping in the Atlantic. In the first half of 1943, after the break, the rate had declined by 60%. By the end of 1943, U-boat losses had accelerated so dramatically that the Kriegsmarine would be forced to fundamentally reconsider its submarine strategy. The consequences radiate through the remainder of the war. More supplies reach Britain, more weapons reach the Soviet Union, more ammunition reaches North Africa, and eventually Europe. The ability to reinforce and supply the D-Day invasion, the Normandy landings of June 1944, depends in significant measure on the security of the Atlantic shipping lanes. And those shipping lanes are secure because of a break that was made possible by 3 men who were willing to die in dark water. CSOM 11, the recognition and the legacy. After the war, back in England on the surface, 3 acts of bravery are formally recognized. Colin Grazier and Anthony Fasson, though dead, received the George Cross posthumously, one of the highest decorations in the British Commonwealth. It's awarded for acts of the greatest heroism or of the most conspicuous courage in circumstances of extreme danger. They receive it without knowing they received it. They receive it without knowing that their sacrifice had broken the cipher that would turn the tide of the entire Atlantic War. Tommy Brown receives the George Medal, also a high honor, but slightly lower in precedence. He's alive to receive it. At 16 years old, he's one of the youngest recipients of the George Medal ever awarded. The discharge paperwork is prepared. He's sent home to North Shields, back to civilian life. Here's one more tragedy wrapped inside the heroism. Brown had lied about his age to enlist. The records show him as older than he actually is. Even the official recognition of his bravery couldn't fully acknowledge that a 16-year-old boy had done what he'd done. The bureaucracy of the military couldn't accommodate that truth. 2 years after the war ends, Tommy Brown attempts to rescue his younger sister from a house fire. The rescue fails. Tommy Brown, who survived diving into a sinking U-boat in the Mediterranean, who survived the cold and the darkness and the death of his comrades, dies in a fire trying to save someone he loved. Reflection and silence. The invisible victory. Consider this. The greatest strategic impact of World War II in the Atlantic came not from the biggest ships, the most powerful weapons, or the most brilliant admirals. It came from 3 British sailors in October 1942, willingly diving into waters they knew were hostile. It came from papers retrieved in darkness. It came from an accident, the failure of German officers to destroy classified material in the moments before death. Consider, too, the secrecy that surrounded this victory. Churchill and Roosevelt knew. The commanders of the Navy knew. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park knew. But the American people, the British public, the soldiers who survived because the U-boats were no longer effective, the families of sailors who didn't die because convoys were finally able to avoid wolf-pack positions, none of them knew. The ultra-secret was kept so carefully that some of it wasn't revealed publicly until decades after the war. In some cases, it wasn't revealed until after the men who captured the material had died. The men who worked at Bletchley Park were often unable to discuss what they had done for their entire lives. They died with secrets intact. Fasson and Grazier never knew they had broken the most important cipher of World War II. They died in darkness, not knowing that their final act would turn the tide of the entire Atlantic War. They died not as celebrated heroes of a famous victory, but as anonymous sailors who happened to be in the right place at a critical moment in history. Tommy Brown lived long enough to see the recognition. He was given medals. His parents knew what he had done. But even he couldn't speak about it for years. The ultra-secret was so absolute that even the men involved in this operation were often unable to discuss what they had done. The security arrangements were so strict that the true significance of their actions remained invisible to the world. The U-559 sinking, because this was, in a sense, a sacrifice, changed the course of human history. That single submarine, when it finally sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean, took with it millions of words of cryptographic potential. But the papers it couldn't keep secret, those became the foundation of one of the most consequential intelligence triumphs of the entire war. And millions of people will never know. Millions of people will never know that their survival, that the success of the Allied campaign in Europe, that the eventual victory itself depended on 3 sailors in dark water, one of them only 16 years old, making the choice to dive toward a sinking submarine. This is the story of the invisible heroes. This is the story of bravery that changed history without being witnessed. This is the story of the U-559 and the 3 men who paid the price for humanity's victory.